Hi guys, welcome to our daily encounter. As we move on in the book of 2 Samuel, particularly in chapter 11 and onward, we see somewhat of a downward decline in the situation surrounding David's rule. Things have been on an incline. Recently, we've seen the covenant being given to David. We've seen him exalted over his enemies. We see him as the recognized king over not only Judah, but all of Israel. And we've seen the kingdom expanding and things going really well for David. We've seen the Ark of the Covenant being brought to Jerusalem. Just a lot of positive things have been going on in David's life and in his rule. But again, as we get to chapter 11 and onward, we're going to start seeing things gradually declining, if not sometimes drastically declining. And this all has to do with a sin that David committed. And it's one of David's, if not the lowest point that David had experienced in his life, and especially in his rule. In this situation, David doesn't go out to battle with the army of Israel. He stays back, and it's at night, and he goes up on the top of his house, and he's walking around, and he sees Bathsheba bathing, and he desires her. He has them go and take her to him, and he ends up really committing adultery with her. And then, to make things worse, he tries, when it comes out that she's pregnant, he tries to cover it up by having her husband, Uriah, being placed in a very bad predicament in the battle, to the point that he would be killed. And so, in a sense, David indirectly really murdered Uriah. And so this is a very low point for David. And Nathan helps David really see the severity of what he has done. And of course, he repents. He's very sorry for what he did, but still he has to bear the consequences of his actions. And this has to do with the loss of his child through Bathsheba. And it says there in verse 15 of chapter 12, "Then the Lord struck the child that Uriah's widow bore to David, so that he was very sick." And so David goes in, he's inquiring of the Lord, he's fasting, he's really seeking the Lord in this particular situation, but to no avail. The child ends up dying. And when David's servants hear that the child has died, they wonder, how can we tell him that the child died? He just because the child was sick, he was, in really bad shape. If we tell him that the baby has died, what will become of David? But David actually kind of could tell that the baby had died based on the way that they're kind of whispering to each other. And it says in verse 20, "So David arose from the ground, washed, anointed himself, and changed his clothes, and he came into the house of the Lord and worshiped. Then he came to his own house, and when he requested, they set food before him, and he ate." And so David ceases his mourning once he hears that the baby had died. And the servants are perplexed by this. They say, "What is this thing that you have done? While the child was alive, you fasted and wept, but when the child died, you arose and ate food." And so they're kind of scratching their heads saying, when the child was still alive, you were very sorrowful. But now the child is dead, in a worse state, from their perspective. How is it that you can eat now? How is it that you can go on and just go on like nothing happened? In verse 22, David responds in this way. He says, "While the child was still alive, I fasted and wept, for I said, 'Who knows, the Lord may be gracious to me and the child may live. But now he has died. Why should I fast? Can I bring him back again? I will go to him, but he will not return to me.'" And so David comes to this state of acceptance, of accepting the situation, accepting his lot, accepting the fact that the child had died. And it helped him tremendously in recovering from this, so much so that in verse 24, David actually comforts Bathsheba. It says, then David comforted his wife Bathsheba, and then it goes on. So not only was he just back to par again, but he had recovered so well and had accepted this so well that he was actually able to comfort his wife, Bathsheba. We might wonder, how did this happen? We might be perplexed like David's servants. How is it that he could come to accept this tragedy and accept it so quickly, especially given how sorrowful he was while the child was alive, yet was sick? And I think if we really just boiled it down, we could say that David was able to come to acceptance so quickly because he had the right perspective. He had the right perspective. He realized that what was done was done. He says, but now that he has died, why should I fast? Can I bring him back again? He's saying, it wouldn't do any good for me to fast now. The child is already gone. All the hope that I had that the child would recover and live a long life is now gone. There's no use of me mourning. There's no use of me fasting. I've come to accept that this is what the Lord has decided. And of course, I'm paraphrasing what he says. But he says, I will go to him, but he will not return to me. In other words, I'll go to the grave where he is, but he's not going to come from the grave back to me. And so he's saying it would be futile for me to go on mourning and fasting and things like that. And so David was able to have put things into perspective. And that led to him accepting his situation. And this principle can apply to more than just death. This idea of having the right perspective in connection to more quickly having acceptance of our situation goes across the board. This can go all the way down to just the minor inconveniences of the day, to more drastic things like what David's experiencing, and everything in between. Oftentimes we have a hard time accepting what God brings into our lives because we're not encountering that situation with the proper perspective. Maybe we have a me mentality of, well, this is how I wanted things to work out. It didn't work according to my plan. And now I'm having to deal with the situation in a way that's not the way that I desired. And we can really work ourselves up into frustration and anger and things like that when we begin to go down that path. But whenever we can look at things in perspective, whenever we can look at things from a biblical perspective, it helps tremendously. Some passages, or one particular passage we can use in connection to this, is in Romans chapter 8, in verse 28, a well-known passage where it says, and we know that God causes all things to work together for good to those who love God, to those who are called according to his purpose. All other scriptures aside, if we just had that one passage, that would be enough to help us have the proper perspective. Whenever we encounter hard times and difficulties and inconveniences, if we can just realize and have this perspective to say, you know what, I don't really like this situation, and we can be honest about that. I don't really like this situation. It does kind of grieve my heart that this is going on. But I know, based on scripture, that God causes all things to work together for good. Somehow, in some way, even though I don't see it right now, in some way, this is going to work for good. Either good for myself, or good for another person, or good for generations to come, whoever it might be that would be benefited, whatever good would come out of it. We know that God is using this for a divine purpose and for a good divine purpose. And when we can have that proper perspective, it leads us more quickly to the stage of acceptance, to say, you know what, I can accept this particular situation because this is my perspective. This is my biblical perspective in connection to that. And of course, before we close the devotion, of course, I do want to say that this in no way belittles the grief, the sorrow, the heartache that we could have, especially in connection to the loss of loved ones. I don't want to be flippant about that. Don't want to gloss over that or think, well, people who are grieving over the loss of a loved one must not have the right perspective or that they're doing something wrong. Well, no way want to suggest that. This is just a way of helping us maybe work through that process a little bit better. And it's a way of helping us, not making us feel guilty, but helping us to know how to respond to difficult situations. And again, it can be anywhere on the scale, anywhere in that spectrum of sorrows or hardships or difficulties. It's just a way to help us. And so it's not a reason to judge others or even to condemn ourselves, but merely to help us to know a better way to perhaps respond to situations that we really wouldn't prefer, in situations that we really wish wouldn't have happened, and being able to accept those a little bit more readily. So here's some things we can reflect on and think about as we do our reading today. With that, guys, I do thank you for watching the video today. Hope you guys have a great day. Love you guys. God bless.